Hello and welcome back to Everard Junction. Today we're going to do sort of an update video, bring you up to speed with the various projects that I've got going on the layout. I've been working quite hard on it over the last 2 months or so and made a couple of significant changes, as well as improve several items of rolling stock and put a few items of rolling stock back into service on the layout that have been sitting on my project shelf for quite some time. So we'll start off here with the most obvious change, and that is significant alterations to the branch line. I was never particularly happy with the curve on the branch line in this location. Here's how it used to look, and you can see that the curve's quite tight and it's all a little bit just rammed into the space. It wasn't easy to pull it off, and I learnt a lot while I was doing it, and I thought I'll come back, I think, and reapproach this with a fresh pair of eyes and some important lessons learned. So as you can see, I've changed it quite a bit. So starting at this joint just here, I removed the track, took up the plywood and realigned the curve, so the curve's now a lot smoother. The bridge has moved down the line probably about 10 centimeters, something like that. And as you can see, the curve now looks a little bit different where it goes underneath the bridge just there. You can see how it sort of keeps going. So along with realigning the track and changing the curve, I've also completely rebuilt the bridge into something that looks a little bit more convincing to my eyes. And I've also added the important detail of putting some girders in between the tracks. Though you can't really see it because there's too many trains going past. So there you can see the plate girders arranged in a bit more of a realistic fashion, and I think that looks a lot better than the previous effort. And I've also made a bit more effort with the brickwork. I'm starting to get the hang of scratch building now and working with plasticard and stuff like that. So although it's not perfect, I'd say these walls and buttresses look quite a bit better than my previous attempt. As the curve was originally a bit tighter, I had to add a big chunk of scenery to the side of what I'd already built. So the original retaining wall for the side of the bridge was around this location. And as you can see, I've added static grass and trees and bushes and blended all of that back in. You can see there's a few white spots where the glue is still drying. Over on the far side, I've made a bit of a change to the elevation of the terrain, and the terrain now rises up, so we have a little bit more of a cutting in this location, and I think that really sort of sets the branch line into the scene. It looks a little bit more authentic, a little bit more like what you would see in real life. I never quite got on with the idea of the terrain just being flat in this location, so as you can see, got a little bit of an embankment there. And then it's difficult to tell on camera, but there's a rise in the terrain just there, and you can see how it sort of makes its way up to the track level on the main part of the layout. So the track itself now takes a route all the way around that curve and through a hole in the back seam just there. And of course this area all back here will be scenicked and redone again to better standards, so don't worry about anything that looks a little bit strange or off, like that chunk of brown overspray. We'll sort that out. So the original route of the track when I did this back in 2020 was that once it got underneath this location here, it took a very sharp turn, and it basically turned within the confines of the baseboard and came all the way around to this spot here. And it was all very much a squeeze and just sort of made to work with the equipment that I had. So what I've done is I've kept the curve continuing round. That's a 36-inch radius curve. It goes all the way around, it goes through a hole in the back seam there. And then it takes a right turn and it appears in a baseboard that I added in this location here, and you can see what we've got is a reverse loop so that the locos on the branch can sort of run continuously. So I didn't film doing any of this as it was quite a long job, quite involved, and let's just say it was assembled with great difficulty. As you can see, I've really stretched to the limits of the edge of the house just there, and it just about fits into position. But it does allow the branch line to work in a bit more of an interesting manner, and I can run something a little bit different as well as DMU, so you can send the old loco haul train down here for filming purposes, because it's going to turn around, and when it reappears back out of the bridge, the loco will still be leading. So there's a few filming opportunities there, and it just makes a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more variety for operations on the branch line. Again, it was assembled with great difficulty, but what I've managed to do is construct all of the woodwork here with all of the plasticard, the track pre-ballasted, the addition of some cable troughing and some dirt texture as well as weathering, and that detail continues right the way underneath the bridge. There is no break in the detail and the plasticard, so that when you peer inside, everything is weathered and looks as good as it should, even on the easy to reach parts of the layout. Again, on the previous attempt in this section, I didn't do that. I laid all the track and everything and then just sort of lobbed some ballast in with my hand into the tunnel and then just lobbed a big load of glue in afterwards, hoping that it would, you know, look somewhat convincing. And the truth is, when you really did look, get down on your knees down onto the layout and look inside the tunnel, it looked pretty rubbish. So, gone back through it, redone it, and I'm much happier. So I'll give you a bit of context and show the branch line in operation with a unit running down it. So this is all unchanged. You can see the joint of the track just there where I cut the track out. So all of this has been relayed. Go through the new bridge, through that section just there. Then it'll take a right hand turn and it appears in this section just here. And this is what we call basically a reverse loop, where literally the train just reverses around and goes back the way it came. When you fit a reverse loop, you do need to put a little box of tricks into position just to make sure the polarity of the voltage doesn't get affected. So there's a little bit of wiring to do just to wire one of these up, but it's fairly straightforward. There's one point at the back just there, and I've removed the spring from it, so whatever's travelling around the loop will just force the point whichever way it needs to go without causing any derailments. Then reappears back here underneath the bridge and runs back up the branch line on its way to the station. So while we wait for it to arrive at the station, I'll just quickly cover this, as I've not been back at the station for an awfully long time, and some of you don't even know I have a station, but I do. The reason for not making any more progress on the station was I was waiting for Pico to release this particular crossing in a slightly different style, and it got delayed and there were problems and various things, and then all of the stuff that's been going on over the last year or two. Basically, I don't think it's going to turn up, so I'm just going to make do with that one, and we're just going to work on the station and just carry on with that. But I did quite fancy changing that piece of track, but it doesn't look like that'll be possible. So a little bit unfortunate, but I'm just going to strike that one off and just crack on with the station, because this really needs to get some scenery done now. But you can see there, the unit came into the station, albeit it did stop a little short because I haven't finished setting it up yet. But it comes into the station, it pauses for a predetermined amount of time. I've just got it waiting about 5 seconds at the moment while I continue to make sure everything works properly. But then it goes on its way back down the branch line. So we're past this section here with the terraced houses, heading through the urban section of the layout. And it will then trundle onto the single track portion and head back towards the bridge on the far end of the layout. So for now, I'm really pleased with how this is looking. It's certainly a significant upgrade over the previous sort of effort, where I was hampered by a lack of resources and materials, but also I didn't think it through. I didn't plan it to the full extent. I didn't anticipate the difficulties in the radius of the curve and not being able to scenic underneath the layout and all that kind of thing. So I made sure when I built it this time round to lay the track onto a separate piece of wood, ballast that piece of wood, do all of the details to it, then put that into position on the layout, screw it all down, make sure it all works, then take the walls, make the walls out of plywood, make sure everything fits and slides into position, then glue all of the plasticard onto it, and just prepare everything in advance where it can all be painted and detailed and made to look good. And then you can come along to the layout, slide it all into position, screw it down, and then you can come along with the plaster, the sculpt mould, and work on the hillside and blend everything together. And it certainly really helped this area, and it looks quite a little bit more professional than it did before. So we'll go ahead now and take a look at the various other projects I've been working on in the layout, and I've been really trying to catch up with some of the rolling stock jobs that I've had on the bench for getting on for 12 months now. So let's take a look at those. So we'll take a look at the first one. This is a Bachmann Class 108, and it's the oldest model I have on the layout. I've owned this particular example since about 2008. It's got a lot of miles under its belt, but it still works just fine. And one thing I'd been wanting to do with this model for a while was just sort of tidy it up, as it had been subject to some of my sort of poor weathering attempts that I used to do in about sort of 2012, when I used to just sort of spray some brown dirt over everything. So I thought we'll clean it up and we'll make it look a bit more respectable. And I also repainted the blue on the train, so the blue where the Network South East sort of livery is, changed that to a lighter shade, and just tidied it up a little bit, made it look a little bit fresher as it's getting on a bit now. So I tidied up the weathering, sort of washed it basically, sort of cleaned off all of the overdone nasty weathering, cleaned up and touched in any bits of damage, added passenger figures, made sure they were all painted. I've also added a driver, you can't quite see him because of the angle of the camera, and upgraded the decoder so it can now run on the branch line, and just generally gave it a good an oil clean and a service, and now it's running very nicely. It seems quite happy running up and down the branch line. Here's another one of my Class 108s. Same Bachmann model basically, but in blue and grey, and you can see I've done exactly the same thing. So it's now filled with passenger figures. I've upgraded the decoder so that I can use it on the branch line, and I've also upgraded and improved the lighting. So I'll show you the improved lighting. That's my Bachmann Class 117, my newest DMU, running on the main part of the layout just there. But I love the way the trees obscure the light as the train passes. Okay, the 108 has just made its way around the reverse loop at the end of the branch line. It's just making its way through the bridge. And you can see there it is, it's on its way. So it should hopefully, well, the camera will pick it up, but you should be able to get a better look at the lighting. You can see it's a little bit brighter and more evenly distributed. Again, that's just a little issue that the 108 suffers from. It is an older model now, so compared to some of the newer models, the lighting can look a little bit poor. So I made sure I upgraded that whilst I had the unit in bits. I also removed my previous weathering. It was another model that I weathered many years ago and didn't do a particularly good job. So I've cleaned it up. You can see it looks a lot cleaner and fresher, and a little bit more authentic to how these would have looked when they're in service. I have made a video about how to remove weathering from locomotives and reapply it. You should be able to see that in the top right hand corner. Here's another unit that quite a few of you have probably never even seen before. I've had this on the layout for a couple of years now, and it was always intended to work on the branch line, but because the branch line never worked properly, I never did get around to actually getting it operational. It's a Bachmann Class 416 2EPB, I think is the terminology. It's a 2-car electric unit, and the long-term goal with the branch line is to electrify it and add third rail, which is a question I've had probably 800 times in the comments. And yes, I do intend on adding third rail to the branch line, and you may be saying, well, why didn't you do it now when you had it in bits? And unfortunately, I cannot get hold of the Pico third rail detailing parts at all anywhere. No one has stock of them, and unfortunately it's just typical of the circumstances we're in at the moment. Many items, especially as part of the Pico range, are quite difficult to get hold of and are out of stock. So once they are available again, I will of course add third rail to the branch line, and this unit will look a little bit more authentic. Another job I need to do obviously is repaint it. You can see this is in British Rail Corporate Blue, which is too early a livery for the era the layout is set in. But I bought this quite a few years ago, and it was only £65, and I could not resist. That is an outrageous deal for one of those. They now command 3 times that amount for a new one from the shops, so I'll keep that one, thank you very much, and I'll just repaint it. So I'm well chuffed with that. It's a nice looking unit. Once it's repainted into the Network South East, I think it will really look the part on the branch line, especially with that third rail detail. So let's move on to the next project, and that concerns my Hornby Class 60. I've had this model since about 2011, 2012, and it's still probably one of the best diesels I own. And one of the jobs I wanted to do to this was, once again, this was subject to some of my early, not very good weathering. And I've been slowly over the last 2 years really working hard, going through all of the fleet and removing all of the rubbish weathering and making it look more realistic. So my layout is set from 1988 to 1990, and the Class 60 just about makes it into that era, with the very first few examples starting to appear in very late 1989, early 1990. They weren't really in service until 1991, but such a nice model I couldn't resist at the time. So these would have been brand spanking new, and you can see I've reflected that. The model is very, very clean and shiny. I have added a bit of brake dirt and a bit of dust to the underframe, as that sort of thing gets dirty very, very quickly. You can also see I've added a driver to the cab, and it just looks very clean and fresh, almost straight out of the workshop. You can see there's a little bit of exhaust dirt as well on the exhaust silencer just there. So just the very early stages of a bit of dirt, but ultimately it would have been a brand new loco. There you can see the driver just there, gave him a shirt and a tie, as the layout's set during summertime. And it just makes the loco look that little bit more authentic, a little bit nicer to look at as it comes round into view. You can actually see a driver in position, and quite a few of the locos on the layout now have drivers fitted. So I'm pleased with that. That looks a lot closer now to photos of the period, but a much bigger job concerned these wagons that it's pulling. So these are some Bachmann TEA wagons, and once again I've probably had these for getting on for 7 or 8 years, maybe longer, and they were subject to some awful weathering by myself many years ago. I think, if I remember correctly, I took them out into the garden and just went crazy with the airbrush, and yeah, didn't look good. Tank wagons of this type are quite difficult to get the effects right with the weathering, and it's certainly not something I have a lot of experience with. But over the course of several evenings over the last couple of months or so, I've been working through each one in turn, cleaned off all of the old weathering and got them back to shiny clean box fresh models, and started again. I've been experimenting with oil paints and have really tried quite hard to get that sort of washed effect of the fuel or the oil or whatever it might be being spilt down the sides of the wagon from the various fill points, and then obviously that gets loads of dirt and grime stuck to it, and you end up with an effect like that. Use lots of pictures of real ones to try and portray this effect, and it is quite difficult to do, and I found it a bit of a challenge, but I'm certainly a lot happy with them. They look a lot more authentic, look a lot more convincing than my previous airbrush version. Some are weathered much more heavily than others, as per various pictures I found of the real ones when they were in service, and you can see some are a little bit cleaner, and then some are even cleaner than that. So it provides a nice bit of variety to the train, with every wagon being slightly different and unique in appearance. Took a long time to do, and I also made sure to wipe off some of the weathering from the hazard labels and warnings and information that are on the wagons, just to try and better follow the pictures of the real ones when they were in service. And I'm quite pleased now with how they're looking. Quite an old model now. I've had them in my collection for a long time, and one or two of them are a little bit bashed about from years of use and abuse, but it still makes for an impressive train, so I'll be keeping hold of these for quite some time. So moving on to the next project, and this is actually a new arrival to the layout. This is a Wagon Class 47 in rail freight distribution livery. It's named Herbert Austin. It's only fitting, being a car enthusiast myself, that I'd get that one. And as you can see, I've weathered it and done a bit of detailing. I painted the driver and things like that, added all of the etched plates and detail, fuel stains to the fuel tanks, bit of brake dirt around the bogies, exhaust grime, and some subtle washing down the body sides. But again, I followed pictures of the real example of this loco, and this paint job was very fresh when my layout is set, so it's not too grimy, but it is still weathered, and it still looks like it's got a few months of service under its belt. And that's hauling my Bachmann container flats. Again, I've had these in the collection for quite a while now, and you've seen them running a few times, but they were in dire need of weathering. And it's a big job to weather all of these, because you've got to weather all of the containers as well. So although I've still got a few containers left to do, I've been slowly working my way through these, and as you can see, all of the wagons themselves have been weathered and toned down. I've cleaned off some of the dirt from the handbrake wheels there, picked out in white as per the real ones, because they get frequently touched with rags and hands to be used. And all of the containers have had a little bit of rust and a little bit of dirt and a few patches and repairs added to them. You can see there, so a lot of work, but this train now looks a lot more realistic. I just need to finish the rest of the containers. In addition to the new Class 47, I've also picked up a new Class 33, this model being produced by Herman. I have two of these in my collection already, but they're much older models and represent Herman's first attempt at the Class 33. So there's a few errors and inaccuracies in those models, most notable being the incorrect roof profile. It doesn't bother me a massive amount, but when I saw this one for a fair price, I thought, oh, that'd be nice to get hold of one of the sort of newer versions of the same model. So here it is. So you notice this is a slightly unusual colour scheme. It's one of the reasons why I was drawn to it. This locomotive, the real one in real life, was overhauled in 1986, and as part of that overhaul, the depot staff at Eastleigh, where it was based, named it and also repainted it into British Rail Green. Now, this locomotive carried several versions of British Rail Green during the late 1980s and early 1990s. This represents the second version of the paint job, which is good for about 1986, 1987. They later added some white paint to the cab window surrounds, and they gave it a small yellow warning panel, a few other differences as well. That's something I may consider to repaint on this model in future, to try and sort of bring it forward a few years to better fit in with my layout. But as it is, it's a nice model, and having something in British Rail Green is just a little bit of a novelty for me, as I don't have anything in that colour. So it's a brand new model, obviously, so it still needs to be weathered. One of the reasons why I picked this one up was because it was often seen working with ballast wagons on engineers' trains, and I have a load of ballast wagons, so it'll work perfectly with that particular train. It needs weathering. I have fitted a driver to the cab, although he's very difficult to see because he's currently seated on the far side of the loco. And I've also fitted a lens 8-pin decoder, and it runs very, very nicely. So that represents the second loco I purchased this year. I do have plans to get a couple more locos, but it all depends on when they get released. I don't tend to buy locos all that often, but there are a couple on the horizon now that are nearing completion, hopefully, and I'll certainly be interested in those, such as the Dapol Class 59, and Herman are also having a go at the Class 45, and I can just about justify the British Rail Green one they're doing. So there might be some more models appearing on the layout in the not too distant future, but for now that is my loco purchases of 2021. Another job I've been doing is this pair of Dapol Class 121 rail cars, or bubble cars as they were often known. I already weathered these and added all of the various accessories and details quite some time ago, and they're used to work mostly the services on the branch line. Something they desperately needed was passenger figures, so similar to the pair of 108s you saw earlier on in the video, I have now added all the various passenger figures and driver into the cab of both units. I absolutely hate painting passenger figures. It takes absolutely ages, and you need so many of them to make the train look convincing and realistic. But I have managed to get these ones done, and I'm slowly winning the battle with populating all of the passenger vehicles on the layout. Once you've added a good number of passenger figures to something and the lights are on inside, it just looks fantastic, at least to my eyes. So now I always like to try and, if possible, fit passenger figures to my passenger carrying vehicles. I almost forgot about this one. We'll just cover off a little project with this Hornby Class 31. I've had this in the collection again for many years, probably about 9 years, something like that. It's got a lot of miles under its belt, still works faultlessly, very good model. This model was repainted a couple of years ago by myself. I did do a video about it. I think I painted it in 2018, if I remember correctly, into the attractive rail freight red stripe livery. One of the jobs that I was meaning to do after that was to replace the glazing. The glazing on this model, being a factory weathered model originally, was quite foggy. It was difficult to see through the glass, and once I'd done my version of weathering to it and then later removed that and then ended up repainting the model, the glazing was really looking very tired indeed. Lots of overspray, lots of dirt and debris, marks, chips and cracks, things like that. And it really let the whole engine down. It looked a little bit poor when you got up close. So I was able to track down a damaged body shell on eBay, and it was a good price. So I purchased that just purely to steal all of the glazing out of it and put it into this model. That particular body shell's got various cracks in it and all kinds of damage, so it's pretty much no good for anything other than the scrap bin. But it did have a complete set of pristine glazing, and I fitted that to my model I have up here on the layout, and it really does look an awful lot better, actually being able to see into the interior of the cabs. So for example, it's now possible to see the driver and second man that I fitted to this model some years ago. So the 31 is looking a lot more professional, and you'll continue to see that running on the layout for many years. So another quite sizable job I have in progress is weathering my rake of Acura scale PTA wagons, and these are taking absolutely ages to do. So you can see some of them are weathered and some of them aren't, but having 20 examples, it's surprising just how many evenings it chews up. So at the rear of the train, some of the wagons that are nearing completion, still not finished, but they're getting there. So I've painted the inside of the wagon a sort of dirty brown sort of colour to better replicate what sort of a mess the loads would do to these wagons in real life. And I've also taken the time to add lots of small scratches and rust marks all over the bodies of the wagons, as these wagons were due a repaint during the era of my layout, so they would have been starting to look a little tired, and you can see I've done that there. So I've weathered about half of these so far, and it is taking a very long time, but it certainly looks a lot better. I'm using real photos, of course, of the real ones when they were in service to see how they would have looked when they were in this livery, and I'm making sure that some are a little bit dirtier than others, some are a little bit more scratched and beaten up than some others, but you get the idea. So once this train's complete, it should look an awful lot better. These wagons are a very sort of bright, striking livery, and they look very, very clean and shiny when you get them out of the box, and in real life that's just not the case. You can see a good example there of one that's dirtier than the other. So there should be a nice bit of variation throughout the train. It's just taking a while. It's a very boring, tedious job, but I'll get there eventually. So a lot of the work has been focused on thinning out the various projects in the project cupboard, and I've been making some good progress, but we've still got a couple of stragglers that I'm close to finishing, and one of those is this Wagon Class 101, which I'm currently painting into Network Southeast livery, and it's nearly finished, so we should be able to get that back on the chassis soon and also get that working as service on the branch line. I always find this livery very difficult, time consuming and complex to paint, but I'm relatively happy with how this one has come out. It's certainly not top-notch work, but it certainly looks okay to my eyes. This was originally British Rail blue and grey, and those of you who've been following the channel for a few years may remember seeing that unit in service on the layout. Well, the plan was to paint it into Network Southeast, and it's taken many years to finally get around to it. It's been off the layout for at least 1 year, but we'll have that back in service hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Incidentally, this Class 31 was the one I purchased to get the glazing from, and the body has very severely cracked in a few places, so I won't be bothering too much with that, as it's an early example anyway. It needs quite a lot of modification to bring it up to date with my layout, but certainly served a good use for getting the glazing. I'll rob the wipers and a few other details off it, and then it's basically no good than just putting in the bin really, because it's quite badly split at the other end. And here we have the last few containers waiting to go through the weathering works, and I should hopefully get those done in the next couple of weeks as well. So really pleased. This was absolutely chock full of all kinds of stuff. You can imagine all those tank wagons and DMUs and stuff lying around in here. So that's been the focus of a lot of my work over the last couple of months, as well as making that big substantial change to the branch line. So priority number one is to get some scenery back here, get back to the position I was in a few months ago, and I've got a few ideas for what I want to do in that section, so I look forward to getting that installed, and there'll be a video concerning that. This section here I didn't film, I just wanted to get on with it, and it was really nice just to spend a couple of evenings in peace and quiet and just you know, get the static grass out, plant a few trees, start putting a fence in and things like that. But we'll be doing broadly the same thing in the background there if I don't change my mind. So we'll be getting some scenery on there as soon as I can, and I also want to work on the station on the other side. So you'll be familiar with these houses. Well, this whole scene continues round, that's the plan anyway. It will continue round to the station, and currently it's serving as a bit of a temporary workbench. I've neglected the station for a long time, and it's now certainly the weakest area on the entire layout, but as I say, I was cautiously optimistic and hoping that things might go to plan and I'd be able to get my hand on a bullhead version of that crossing, but it looks like Pico have dropped plans for it. It's obviously been too many issues and too many delays, so that's fine. I can make do with that one, it's fine. It just doesn't look quite as good as the new one would have done, but I'll get it all ballasted, and then we can really start working on the platforms a little bit more and really bringing the station to life. But that's the reason why nothing happened around here. I was purely waiting on that piece of track, but it doesn't look like it's going to turn up, so never mind. I've also got more scenery to do, obviously, on the area back here. So we've got an embankment, a road, and sort of beginnings of a field. So I'll sort the scenery out for that, and there'll be videos concerning that section. But the main priority was just to get things looking a little bit more presentable, as so much of this area was in bits and in disarray, and it wasn't very exciting or motivating to look at, so I just wanted to get that sorted. And while there's still plenty to do, it's nice now that we can run the trains again and things look okay. So with that, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. I think I covered off all of the stuff I've been working on, but there's always bits and pieces in the background. I'll be back soon with another video concerning some scenery, most likely, or fitting a flashing tail lamp. We'll see which one gets done first. But the main priority was just to get trains up and running again and get that branch line properly working. So it's taken a long time, but I'm really pleased with it, and I should be able to get back to normal and make a few videos a little bit more often. Obviously, summer will be drawing to a close in the next couple of months as well, and the winter modelling season will kick off, and it won't be quite so hot up here. So I should be able to make a lot of progress over the course of the winter, but we'll see how we go. I'll also put together a running session, as I got most of the trains out today and gave everything a good workout and a good clean. I know some of you just enjoy watching the trains running, so I'll get a little 20-minute something sorted out for that, and hopefully that'll be uploaded in the next week or so. We'll see how we go.